Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 19th of December 2024. We are getting perilously close, or joyously close to Christmas, aren't we? And this is Thursday today, and this is the fourth day, just to remind people that Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtain and myself will be doing a live to ramp up donations for the campaign. ATP Geopolitics, the team here, I'm so proud of you guys for donating to almost 25,000 euros. That's fantastic. We are going to be helping, instead of a third truck, our third 10,000, if you like, is to help the other channels who are struggling a little bit more. I'm just so honoured that you guys are here and a part of this. Fantastic stuff. Now, we're going to be talking this afternoon at 2:30 UK time, 2:30 in the afternoon UK time, with Phil Ittner again from On the Edge podcast, but also Georgie from Ukraine Matters. So that should be really cool. I hope my brain is working. I had a very late night last night, geeking out. And that when I have a lack of sleep, it affects my word. I've just had to restart this video like 3 times because I couldn't remember the word donation. And my brain, with my multiple sclerosis, my brain was just having short circuits. And I have a feeling we're going to have a day like that. So bear with me, guys. Right, let's get to the Ukraine General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. They can be found in the description to the video below. We have an Andrew Perpetual loss list as well today, which is fantastic news. Okay. Let's start with 1,530 personnel lost. Is a very high number again in that category. Really attritional personnel wise. This war at the moment, it has been for some time. 5 tanks. Fairly useful number of tanks. You know, it's been up and down. I wonder how many tanks the Russians have left. We saw a train of a number of T-62s being sent in through Rostov. I think that's all they can still manage at the moment. Well, I don't know, actually. I don't know the production statistics of T-90Ms. I'd like to know that exactly, like the true figure of brand new tanks that they are building at the moment in Russia compared to what they're losing on a daily basis. Armored personnel vehicles, 27 of those lost in the last 24 hours, as according to Ukrainian General Staff, and that's pretty good. That's over the daily average. 14 artillery systems is below the daily average there. That's been a little bit up and down, that one. Anti-aircraft warfare systems, 1 to be added to that. That's good news. And we have 68 vehicles and fuel tanks, fairly healthy number there, it has to be said, and 4 pieces of special equipment. So fairly decent statistics there for the Ukrainians. Bear in mind that you've got to take them with a pinch of salt. Now, we come and look at the Russian stats just for the 17th. Now, Andrew hasn't done these stats for a good long week or so, and there will be, I'm pretty sure he will be bringing them out. I think he is going to be. So this is not completely random. I mean, it's not yesterday, but the day before, so it's fairly close to today. But there are lots that we are going to catch up with, hopefully, and we'll be able to go through them probably all in one big hit. Okay. So in terms of the entirety of the stats, it's looking like a 3-to-1 Russian losses to Ukrainian losses, maybe a little bit more than that. And combat asset losses, it's about a 2-to-1 there. So pretty good for the Ukrainians. If you remember, earlier in the war, they were enjoying 3-to-1, 5-to-1 in combat asset losses. That has gone to somewhat more of a parity as it's dynamic up in Kursk. The Ukrainians losing more equipment up there because they are attacking in places. It's less positional up in Kursk, although I imagine it's becoming more positional actually with each passing day. And they're still using vehicles up and down the front line, but just not so many in other places because they're more defensive. At least not as many as the Russians. Right, let's go to the Ukrainian losses to begin with. And we start with a boat artillery piece. These are all damaged. All the tanks are damaged. We have 6 of them, although interestingly 5 of them just not labelled there. So interesting that Andrew or his team has been able to know that they're damaged and not destroyed, but can't indicate what tank it is exactly. So it could be just maybe a bit of thermal imagery on a tank as it gets, maybe a bit of an FPV drone or drone dropping munition, more likely, drops on it. You can't tell what it is from a distance, but you can tell the explosion was fairly minimal. It could be something like that. So that could be why we don't know the tank type there. IFV, BMP, there's damage, and an AFV damaged. So not bad that those are all damaged and not destroyed. We get down to APCs, 2 of them captured. That's a Snatch Land Rover captured, and an M113 APC as well. So that's a bit annoying for the Ukrainians to lose those. A destroyed Striker, a really good task and purpose video of looking at the attack in Kursk and the activity up there with the guy that runs task and purpose, the presenter for that. He's a veteran himself, so he kind of sort of knows his onions. And it was fascinating to see his experiences up in Kursk, and he was trying to work out whether what we understand of the war is reality, or whether, because when he himself went to Iraq, he was saying, we were painted this picture of what Iraq was and why we were there, and when we got there it was very different, and actually it was a bit of a letdown as far as the morality of it, the objectives of it, etc., etc. And he was wondering whether Ukraine and Kursk, and he didn't just do Kursk, he went other places as well, but that main part of that video was in Kursk, and he was wondering whether it was going to be a case of this is Iraq 2.0, and he's like, no, it absolutely isn't. It really is. There is moral clarity. It really is good to see the Ukrainians doing what they're doing and being the people they are. And it was really heartwarming from my point of view to get our sense of the moral dimension, the political dimension, and the military dimension being ratified by someone who was going out there with good intentions to get the truth of what's going on the front lines. But he was, I think he was a former Striker driver himself, or Striker crew member himself. And he did some really good imagery of the Striker in that video, task and purpose video. And he was singing the praises of the Striker, and they were as well. Really good armor. There's a lot of, and Bradley's as well, a lot of FPV drone threat all the time. Lots of scars on these vehicles of where FPVs have bounced off or been protected by the explosive reactive armor. Thank you very much, Sarah. Oh, a cup of tea. Marvelous stuff. Amazing. And the explosive reactive armor, or the tiles on a Bradley's, kind of similar thing, have worked really effectively to protect those vehicles. But they're going to need more of them, aren't they? They've got Strikers on the way. It seems that one of the packages recently had 212 Strikers, I think. So that's really good news. I'm waiting to see Bradleys. Keep talking about how they're going to be surely sending a bit large batch of Bradleys, unless these are one of the things that they're sending under the radar and we don't know about. Anyway, back to this list. I'd expect to see quite a lot of Strikers on here because they do seem to be used, particularly up in Kursk. They are effective. Kozak 7 abandoned there, and that's an indigenous one, and a Humvee or destroyed. And then usual civilian vehicles. Going to the Russian losses, we can see fairly substantial, particularly in terms of civilian vehicles being used for military purposes. Lots of cars and larders and loaves. We've got a lot of ATVs here, so quads and golf buggies are plenty listed on this data sheet. Then we're going to go to the combat asset losses, engineering vehicle taken out, a couple of destroyed and damaged pieces of artillery. What we can note is that the vast majority of these are destroyed as opposed to damaged, and that are destroyed and abandoned, and that's good news for the Ukrainians. So really good ratio here of destroyed to damaged with the Russian losses. Tanks, about 6 of these, half a dozen tanks, varying types, including a track guard and shed with mine rollers. We've got a whole host of infantry fighting vehicles, maybe 15, something like that, maybe a few more actually, maybe almost 20 infantry fighting vehicles, BMP-1s, BMP-3s, couple of BMP-2s, and BMDs and BTRs. Now, really good Perun video from 2 weekends ago that looks at the replacement rate, the stockpile exhaustion in terms of these different vehicles. It talks about BTRs in that, talks about BMPs, and essentially they make BMP-3s still. That's the only one they manufacture. Again, I'd like to know the real true production schedules and capacity to produce BMP-3s that the Russians have, but they're going to be running out of BMP-1s and 2s pretty damned soon. I mean, they were talking in terms of Q1 to Q2 of next year, and we're almost there. And that is going to be interesting to see whether, what the behavioural changes will be as a result of that. APCs, we got MTLBs, a couple of them destroyed, and they're another one that the Russians have lost an awful lot of. They've used a lot of them. They're the tractor of the Russian army. But yeah, the storage of those looks pretty much depleted. Interesting, there's a damaged M113. So they've got a captured M113 that they're using themselves, the Russians, as an APC hit by a night vision drone, FPV drone, and then a couple of Tiger Rams. So yeah, fairly challenging list for the Russians in terms of the mass of the vehicles they're losing again. Now, Gerasimov, the chief of staff, who we don't really hear much from anymore, I do think he's suffered from an injury that he took in a strike in Crimea sometime back, where he disappeared for like 6 months or whatever. He popped up to do a medals, not even a ceremony. It was like in some kind of hall that he did a quick medal give out, and then we saw him voting with Shoigu, and it's like he was being led around by Shoigu, and he looked really doddery and not very well. I think he was either a heart attack or something natural, or he was hurt in a strike that he was thought to have been involved in. We just do not hear. I mean, he's a chief of staff. He's the one that's supposed to be running the war for Russia. And when was the last time I mentioned Gerasimov? 6 months ago? Literally that long ago. Absolutely incredible. Anyway, he has said that the AFU have lost over 42,000 soldiers and more than 1,800 tanks and armoured vehicles in the Kursk region alone. That's I presume my intuition is that that's obviously an overstatement of what has actually happened to the Ukrainians. It's going to be challenging for the Ukrainians, of course, but then they won't have lost that many vehicles or men there. Now, the US State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller has stated that the US currently has no confirmation of new North Korean units being deployed to Russia, but does not rule out such a possibility. Quote, I have no new reports regarding the transfer of additional soldiers from North Korea to Russia. We continue to assess that this remains a possibility. I wonder about Russia's ability to recruit more and more. Now, I've talked about before, there was someone that Greg Terry spoke to that said, a Korean chap that said that he expects 100,000 to go. When you look at what it's costing Russia to get these soldiers, we talked about this yesterday, that they were supposedly, it's costing quite a lot of money, and that's going to include their equipment as well. Then there are claims that, tech's involved, hydrocarbons, whatever it is. I'm fairly sure that North Korea are in a power position and can demand from Russia really high costs for providing men and material. And the question would then be, how much capacity does Russia have to pay the North Koreans, given the economic status at the moment of Russia? This is why Yessa is talking about suggesting that the best Russia can do from Russia's point of view is provide them with hydrocarbons, because they have a much more sustainable supply of that. Okay, so from intercepted Russian phone calls, there is this idea that that North Korean troops are suffering train loads of wounded. In a call, a nurse at a Moscow hospital tells her husband, a soldier fighting in Kursk Oblast, that wounded fighters are being brought in by the train load. Doesn't surprise me. And then Tim White says 100 North Korean troops have already died on the battlefield and up to 1,000 more injured. The figures came from South Korean MP. So now we've got South Korean MP Lee Seong-kwon quoting the country's National Intelligence Service. So the South Korean intelligence is saying 1,000 injured, 100 dead. We've got a Russian nurse intercepted phone calls saying that there are train loads of casualties coming in from Kursk of North Koreans. We've seen the imagery that I've shown you over the last 2 days of hospitals, a particular hospital wing in the Kursk clinic, where there are lots of North Koreans that we've seen in hospitals there. So it is definitely I think you piece all of this information together. It's definitely highly attritional for the North Koreans. There have been lots of videos of them being taken out in the fields, not really knowing how to deal with drones, and not really having the tactics to, well, you kind of looking at what tactics they've got, just walking like randomly across fields and getting absolutely hammered. And there are claims that there are these meat waves that they're being used in. Anton Gerashchenko, among many others yesterday, claiming that a Russian Ka-52 attack helicopter, the Alligator attack helicopter, was lost. This is the fighter bomber admitting this, so it's almost certainly true. The kind of eternal flight statements that he puts out. He adds it's probably shot down by Russian air defense. According to open data, Russia has already lost about half of these helicopters. So these are their very best helicopters, and that's what we know from kind of visually confirmed data and whatnot, and Oryx, that at least half of their Ka-52 attack helicopters have been lost. That's a staggering number. Videos appeared on Russian media showing a large amount of destroyed military equipment, says Anton Gerashchenko again. This is one of the many. I mean, she's incredible. That's 3 vehicles side by side. Another one there, and that's already the ones that we missed at the beginning. I mean, this is an incredible bit of footage, actually, and it just goes to show how much equipment is being attrited. So when you have your naysayers coming on saying, oh, this is absolute rubbish, blah, 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 Russians aren't losing X, Y, and Z, and you're like, well, why are you using golf buggies? Why are you using quad bikes? Why are you using motorbikes? Why are you using track garden sheds? You know, etc., etc., etc. And then why are your stockpiles on satellite imagery visually confirmed to have been exhausted? You are losing that many pieces of kit, and here's just one data point, and you can sort of count up the vehicles. These are all combat assets here. That's 1, 2, is that 3? There are 2 there back to back, and then you've got some in the background there. Goodness me, right? Okay, here there's like 2 or 3 vehicles over there that you could be forgiven for missing. Just my goodness. So there's a couple over there, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. That's a car there. That's at least 17 vehicles in a really short amount of time, and that's only looking one side of the road. That's not looking the other side of the road. So there are these roads of death where it's just incredible the amount of equipment that's being destroyed. Now, I've seen a couple of bits of footage over the last 24, 48 hours of these drones using thermite. Again, we went through a period of not seeing loads of examples of the Ukrainians using this, and then suddenly it kind of disappeared, and now they're popping up again. Ukrainian drone dragon with thermite mixtures burning down a Russian hideout with infantry is the claim there. That's a damn good cup of tea. Moving on. So I didn't know what to make of this. This is in Novosibirsk at a military unit where apparently there are burning fuel tankers here, and it's a Legion Freedom of Russia. So these are your Russians fighting for Ukraine against Russia, but you know they're fighting in Ukraine or maybe across the border into Russia. But here we got Novosibirsk. So this is sabotage being carried out by these people, it appears, burning fuel tanks at a military base there. So, good stuff. I presume it's sabotage and not, that's why I was saying I didn't quite know what to do with this. I presume that's not a drone strike or anything like that. But Novosibirsk, it's not that close, is it? I don't think. Passenger train has collided with a freight train in Murmansk region of Russia. So a bit of a disaster there. Again, it sounds horrible to say that that's good, to see civilian trains smash and commercial trains smash into each other in another country. But in terms of Ukraine prevailing, any kind of logistical nightmare in Russia is good for Ukraine. So this, takes out locomotives that yes, they do have lots of locomotives, but they're having problems with ball bearings and rolling stock, and this will take out that track for some time, and that could affect movement of resources, movement of material, etc., etc. Just all of those things are beneficial for Ukraine. Now, we're just going to have a quick talk on the assassination of the general or lieutenant general and his assistant the other day. So Shashant Joshi quotes from the New York Times. Even inside Ukraine, though, some question the wisdom of such operations. A senior Ukrainian special forces officer who spoke on condition of anonymity to provide a candid assessment said they have zero impact strategically and tactically. Okay, let's just do first a few more sources. So that's interesting. So maybe you're wondering how effective they are. And when you're doing that calculation, you have to think about whether Russia reacts to that and it escalates somewhat, or they do something that's just as bad back to Ukraine. Maybe they start assassinating people in Ukraine. Is it worthwhile doing that? That's the question. And there will be different ways of analysing that in terms of the actual. So it might not have an effect tactically or maybe even strategically, but it could well have an effect in terms of the psyche, these kind of more abstract ideas or ways of measuring success. However, Keith Kellogg, Trump's advisor envoy to Ukraine, has said it's not a good idea. Trump's peace envoy nominee criticizes Russian general assassination. He said that he's criticized the recent assassination during an interview on Fox News, saying it's not a good idea. That's what I showed you part of that interview the other day. Was that yesterday? Time. I barely understand it. So that's interesting that it's not a good idea. I'd like to know what he's basing that on, because it could. Well, okay, we'll go back to that actually. So, is it not being a good idea? Is that based on the practicalities of that, as in what are the exact ramifications, or is it a moral position on assassination? I don't know. And in fact, Zelensky's come out and replied to that assessment from Kellogg. So Zelensky said today that he hadn't heard Keith Kellogg's interview yet, but he will meet Trump's incoming peace envoy in Kyiv. Despite the US carrying out and supporting Israel's various assassinations, Kellogg criticized Ukraine for killing a war criminal, says Tim White. In other words, Tim White's being a little bit... Tim White's showing the double standards of Keith Kellogg, potentially, depending on what his metrics of evaluation are there. But he's saying, hang on, you've been really supportive of Israeli assassination attempts. What's wrong with this one? Why are you not happy here? Now, Konstantin says assassinating. He's someone that's he's a Ukrainian that's often involved in Andrew Perpetua's live streams. He does a lot of fundraising for equipment. He used to be in the army. I think he's now abroad. He's been abroad for some time, but he has fought for the Ukrainians, I think probably in the 2014 to 2022 conflict. Anyway, assassination of a high-ranking Russian general shows Ukraine's capable intelligence services. Also, it demonstrates its sovereignty and autonomy in decision-making. This very independence frustrates some Western elites who would prefer Ukraine to remain weak and perpetually on the verge of defeat. Could that be Keith Kellogg? Could this be a reaction that these Ukrainian upstarts are going and making their own decisions and doing things on their own back? Well, yeah, it's their war. Now, my quick tuppence on assassinations. War is assassination on a mass scale. So when you are seeing North Koreans or Russians rushing across fields and they're getting mown down by machine guns or by drones or by artillery or mortars or whatever, it doesn't really matter. That is killing another person intentionally. That is essentially assassination. Now, when you are assassinating someone back in Russia, you're still just doing the same thing. As long as they are military personnel, I have absolutely no problem with the assassination of military personnel. These are people involved in the war. That it is part of Russia's war project, which is to invade another sovereign, democratically elected, democratic country. Okay, so I don't have a problem with the principle of assassination of military personnel. It gets quite interesting when you then start saying, yeah, but what if the ramifications of that assassination are not worth it doing? That's kind of what we're just talking about. If Russia decides to do something as retaliation to Ukraine, and that retaliation is far more of a hindrance to Ukraine than the assassination was valuable, then that's not worth doing. So you can critique it on that kind of principle. For sure. And I don't know here. I don't know what they got out of killing this person, whether it really was worth doing, or etc., etc. And then you get interesting moral questions about whether assassination of a politician or someone else involved in the war, but less directly within Russia. Is assassination of a politician justifiable in war? I mean, the politician isn't someone that's running around with a gun, but what if they're the ones making the decisions to allow for the war to take place? They are actually more, in a sense, morally responsible for people dying, for people invading Ukraine, than the people doing the invading. Do you know what I mean? Like, someone that's helping to make the decision that the war takes place has much more responsibility on their shoulders for the war than someone charging in a field with a gun in their hands. Yeah, okay, the politician isn't physically killing someone with a gun or trying to kill someone with a gun. That's why you're killing that Russian invader. But that politician could have a much greater value and much greater responsibility for that war. And so you can argue that it's much more justifiable to assassinate a politician. But then what are the moral implications there? I mean, et cetera, et cetera. And then you start, being able to justify sort of bombing the Duma, and is that acceptable, and so on and so forth. So as with moral discussions, there often are no clear-cut answers. There's no objective truth, and we have to muddle through our own subjective evaluations of what the case is, morally speaking. Okay, moving on. Tim White here says, this is Distant Strikes, all 85 drones were shot down or taken out with electronic warfare last night. So it's 40 electronic warfare and 45 shot down. So that's excellent. 100% interception again from the Ukrainians. 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles got through at Kryvyi Rih. Kryvyi Rih is taking a bit of a beating at the moment. And a KH-59 or 69 guided aerial bomb got through defences. It's not a bomb, it's a missile. That is a cruise missile, right? So that got through defences. Unless they're unsure whether it was an aerial bomb or a cruise missile. Okay, what has happened overnight? So this is, that's definitely last night. So earlier in the evening, there were reports that, or evening my time, I guess that was sort of midnight their time. This was where the Russians were sending off their Shahid drones in Primorsko-Akhtarsk, where the Shahids are launched from. Local residents heard explosions and the work of Russian air defense. And also explosions in Rostov and Taganrog further to the east, sorry. It's interesting. So maybe the Ukrainians were trying to strike at the launch areas for the Shahids. There was a missile attack in Rostov region of the Russian Federation. Actually started taking place during the daytime yesterday, as you can see here. At least several arrivals at the Taganrog metallurgical plant are reported. And indeed, they were Storm Shadow or Scalp EG missiles. They've been caught very clearly on camera. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary set of images there. Storm Shadow Scalp EG on its way to Russian targets. It looks like it was that metallurgical center. We haven't heard too much more about any resulting damage. Special Kherson Cat says, for the first time in the entire war, Storm Shadow and Scalp EG cruise missiles targeted the Rostov region in Russia. So what's interesting there is that has gone into Russia to strike those areas, not hitting targets in occupied Ukraine. And it's also not in the Kursk region. Now, what's interesting here is that Russia hasn't come out and said a red line's been crossed. But essentially, this was a red line that we had painted for Ukraine ourselves, right? But this is great news that the Ukrainians are using UK provided or French provided cruise missiles to strike into Russia, not in the Kursk region. Impacts of the Storm Shadow at Rostov region in Russia, that video that I showed a little bit before. Good news there. Now, Rostov-on-Don, which is, you've got the Sea of Azov, you've got Crimea. To the top right of Crimea, you've got the Sea of Azov, which has Berdyansk, Mariupol. Then you've got Taganrog and Rostov-on-Don. That's a Rostov Oblast, just to the right-hand side of Donetsk. That was under attack last night for the second time in the day because obviously the cruise missiles were striking as well. The acting governor of the region says 7 drones have been shot down tonight, 6 in Taganrog and 1 in Bataisk. He claims that, as usual, there were no damage or casualties. Interesting that there was no damage because there were explosions caught on CCTV and there definitely did appear to be damage that was caught on camera. I'm actually going to go to the next videos. Here we have Russian Telegram channels reporting that the oil depot in Novoshakhtinsk, Rostov region of Russia is on fire after an explosion earlier. A drone attack on Rostov region was reported by local media. Now, it could be that all the drones were shot down. Maybe this is a missile that got through because there are claims that, and this ended up being a massive fire, right? Overnight, multiple Ukrainian attack drones successfully struck a major Russian oil refinery in Novoshakhtinsk, setting the facility ablaze. Ukraine's winter strike campaign against Russian oil infrastructure continues with multiple targets hit this week. And that is where it is, as I was explaining to you. Sea Azov, Berdyansk, Mariupol, Taganrog, Rostov-on-Don, and that's further up to the north on the way to, well, really just up that Russia-Ukrainian border alongside, I guess, level with Donetsk city. But yeah, that was struck yesterday, and it was a really sizable strike. As you can see there, there's a lot of refinery on fire. Although there are claims it's been put out, but I'm not really sure that that's going to have been the case. Russian Telegram channels report that that was struck earlier. Yeah, drones were reported, but I think I've seen somewhere that it might have been a Neptune missile as well. So Tim White says, yeah. In the last few minutes, Ukraine's military intel, that's this morning, has confirmed it was responsible for the attack on Novoshakhtinsk refinery. While some are only just reporting this morning, we knew about that last night. Authorities in Rostov claim the fire at the refinery has now been extinguished. However, not one single new photo or video from Novoshakhtinsk has come out. A reminder that they also claimed everything was shot down with no damage last night. So this is General Forces, and that is, as you can see, a pretty sizable fire. I'm not sure that they've got much form for putting out those size fires just within the night. And indeed, you can see it there. It's a very clear image of it. The Ukrainian General Staff has confirmed a strike on that. Yeah, here it is. The attack involved a combination of drones and Neptune missile systems. The refinery says, war translated. The refinery was the only refinery operating in Rostov region, and it was used to support military activities. So it could be a really successful hit there. Now, Ukraine has launched a missile attack on occupied Zaporizhia. The invaders' head of the occupied part says 1 missile was aimed at Berdyansk and 3 more at Tokmak. He claims all 4 were shot down, with some debris falling on the Sea of Azov. And the rest in a field. Falling in the Sea of Azov, that would have had to have gone past both Berdyansk and Tokmak, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But anyway, there is some imagery appearing to show a missile that has been shot down, although not 100% sure. But yeah, so there might have been some strikes elsewhere in Zaporizhia there. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. Sorry, slightly longer one today. So we're going to start with Sursky here, saying that Russia fails to breach Ukraine's defensive lines in simultaneous attacks. He's the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces. Quote, in the heavy battles, Ukrainian defense forces did not allow Russian forces to breach the defense and achieve operational success in any direction. Interesting. I'm going to be doing a mapping update. I really want to do one. Yes, they ran out of time. It's been fairly dire for the Ukrainians in terms of losing land down in that southeastern corner of the front line around sort of Vuhledar, Kurakova, that kind of area, and obviously Prokrovsk further to the north. I'd imagine that they are still losing quite a bit of territory, but Sursky here, at least, take it with a pinch of salt, is saying that I presume this means that the main trench lines haven't been breached, which is really good news. Although in Kurakova, they're going to start going along them laterally, which could be a challenge. But if that's true, that is good news. He's also said that Russia has increased the number of troops in Ukraine by 100,000 this year. I don't know how to interpret that, because Russia have claimed that they're recruiting. Putin said the other day they're taking 1,000 on a day. That's 30,000 a month, but that'd still be a net loss. So on paper, they might have 100,000 more soldiers, according to the Russian stats. But in reality, they might have fewer troops because actually they've recruited 100,000 more, but lost 150,000 type thing. I don't know if this is Sursky and Ukraine's own intelligence assessment, or whether this is looking at the paper claims of Russia. If the Russians have 100,000 more troops, empirically, sort of in reality, if you like, than they did previously, then obviously that's a massive challenge for the Ukrainians, because you'd be hoping after 3 years of the war that the Russian armed forces would be getting smaller and not bigger. War Translated's Dmitry says the chief of the General Staff, Gerasimov, has stated that all objectives assigned to the Russian armed forces by the country's leadership for 2024 have been, quote, successfully accomplished. Now, I don't know whether this is a precursor to negotiations, which is like, we're okay to negotiate now because we've achieved everything we said we're going to achieve, even though they clearly haven't. And even though it's been a rank embarrassment for them, this is maybe priming the domestic audience for them entering negotiations. Or this is him trying to pull the wool over the eyes of his boss, or what is going on there. The head of the DPR, Denis Pashulin, who we saw putting up a fake Christmas tree in Avdiivka yesterday with about 3 other people, signed a law that allocates homes stolen from Mariupol citizens to Russian state employees, and only afterward, based on arbitrary criteria, to those left homeless. Additionally, demolished apartment buildings are being rebuilt for sale to Russians. Exactly the sorts of stuff that you would expect from Pashulin. Russian soldiers have filmed themselves robbing apartments in the occupied city of Seledove in Donetsk. This is around Pokrovsk, just sort of southeast of Pokrovsk. It seems they are enjoying it. As Gerashchenko says, it's disgusting. This is them looting. We have seen them admit to all sorts of war crimes, the Russians. Here they are looting a Ukrainian domicile. We've seen them looting their own housing up in the Kursk region in Koronovo, a place where the Ukrainians have never occupied. So we know that it was a case of the Russians looting their own stuff. Here they're talking about taking laptops and all sorts. That's what the Russians do. Russia have moved S-300 and S-400 air defense systems from Syria. Where to? Well, the Wall Street Journal says they moved them to Libya. And I don't know if that's for them to be redeployed in Africa, or maybe Libya becomes their new Syria, or whether they're going to end up in Ukraine, as I have previously worried about. So Moscow's operated important naval and air bases in Syria in exchange for the support it provided to prop up Bashar al-Assad. And now I wonder whether that's going to take place in Libya. Someone says here, but I read in Bloomberg that Russia was close to an agreement with the new Syrian government. No, that seems to have fallen through, and they've definitely, I think, packed up shop there in Syria. Right. Tim White says, hashtag Russia is collapsing. A quarter of all shopping centres in Russia may have to close in the next 12 months. A new report shows 1 in 4 are on the verge of bankruptcy, and that's according to the exiled news entity, the Moscow Times. I've been reporting sort of relentlessly on Russia's economic woes. We know that there have been lots of fires in Russia, and I think the prevailing theory is that many of those fires will have been insurance jobs, because, if you've got a company that's going to go under or a shopping centre that's going to go bankrupt, you'd rather claim insurance for it burning down than watch it go bankrupt and lose all your money. So I think that's why we've seen an awful lot of fires. But either way, it's reflective of a terrible economic landscape and prospects in Russia. We've talked about bond yields, we talked about the ruble, interest rates. It's all looking bad there. Now, Putin, according to the Kyiv Independent, acknowledges sanctions have had an impact on Russia's economy. Quote, the sanctions are having an impact, but they are not of key importance, Putin said when talking about the surging inflation and prices in Russia, which is French for, yes, they are hugely important there and they're really hurting. Like, even if he's given a bit of credence to sanctions being an issue. Like, even just by merely acknowledging them shows you that they are having more of an impact than he would like. He will downplay everything, so just add on to that acceptance. I mean, it's fascinating that he's actually accepted that they are having an impact at all. So yeah, I assume that they are having a really great impact on Russia. Now, Shashank Joshi, quoting from The Economist, it might be one that he wrote, quote, Ukraine's economy at large has reinvented itself to navigate wartime realities. It remains 1/4 smaller than in 2021, yet for the first time since 2022, the start of the all-out invasion, it is healthier than its enemies in some key respects. Ukraine's central bank forecasts GDP to grow by 4% in 2024 and 4.3% in 2025. Of course, when your economy gets absolutely hammered, then it's much easier to make growth, isn't it? Because you've retracted and the economy has contracted, and now it can expand again because it's coming from such a poor position. It's a bit like the arguments about post-COVID improvements. How much was down to like improving from a point of, contraction. So the currency is stable and interest rates at 13.5% remain near their lowest in 30 months. Contrast that with Russia, where rates should soon hit 23%. Banks look fragile, and the GDP is set to grow by just 0.5 to 1.5% in 2025. And we do hear lots of news about inward investment coming into Ukraine in terms of certainly the military industrial complex. I mean, this is the difference between Russia and Ukraine, is that Ukraine is receiving a plethora of nations' support for it, and a lot of that will be looking like money flowing in, but also investment flowing in a way that Russia is not getting. Interesting that to compare the two, Ukraine look like they're in a better position. Lastly, sad news that's still going on, the ecological disaster in the Sea of Azov and surrounding areas, Kerch Strait, where those 3 tankers have been in serious trouble. Sunk. I don't know about whether the third one did, but it was looking like it was leaking oil. So the recent sinking of fuel oil tankers in the Kerch Strait has triggered an environmental catastrophe, says Dmitry from More Translated, with marine life struggling to survive as fish suffocate in the polluted waters. That's really horrific, that, isn't it? That looks like, is that a dolphin, not a fish? I don't know. It looks, it looks like a porpoise or something. It's horrendously sad, isn't it? Anyway, on that very depressing note, thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Your continued support is fabulous. And check out the truck campaign that we're running. The whole thing is almost at 70,000, which is great. So we're almost halfway there as a whole. We at ATP Geopolitics are very close to getting 2.5 trucks through. It's absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for your support. Please keep it coming. I appreciate that. Take care, and I will speak to you soon. Toodle pips.